The water is black, not the blue black of deep ocean, but something else, something wrong. In the pre-dawn darkness of November 20th, 1820, the surface of the Pacific breaks apart, not with the gentle roll of a wave, but with violence, with intent. The crewmen of the Essex don't have time to scream before they see it. A wall of pale flesh rising from the depths, barnacles thick as armor plating, an eye the size of a dinner plate staring up at them, with what one survivor would later describe as terrible purpose. The impact sounds like a cannon blast. 85 feet of Nantucket whaling ship splinters like kindling. 20 men are thrown into water 2 miles deep, 1,000 miles from the nearest land, and the creature that destroyed them circles back, deliberately, methodically, as if it knows exactly what it's doing. This is not a story about a whale. This is a story about something far worse. For over a century and a half, we've told ourselves that Moby Dick was fiction, a masterpiece of American literature, yes, but ultimately the product of Herman Melville's imagination, a metaphor for obsession, for man's hubris against nature, for the inscrutability of the divine. We've analyzed it in classrooms, debated its symbolism, written dissertations on the whiteness of the whale. But what if we've been asking the wrong questions? What if the reason Melville's novel feels so viscerally terrifying, so unnaturally detailed, so disturbingly specific, is because he knew something we don't? What if the story we've been taught is nothing more than a carefully constructed cover for something that should have stayed buried at the bottom of the ocean? Recent archival research has uncovered documents that were never meant to see daylight, ship logs that contradict official records, survivor testimonies that were suppressed or dismissed, medical reports describing injuries that shouldn't be possible from a normal whale encounter. And at the center of it all, a pattern, a series of attacks spanning decades, all attributed to different whales, all bearing the same impossible characteristics, the same tactical intelligence, the same deliberate brutality, the same massive, scarred albino form, rising from depths that should have been empty. Researchers are now asking a question that seems almost insane. What if Moby Dick wasn't just one whale? What if it was something that couldn't die? And what if the real horror wasn't that Captain Ahab couldn't kill it, but that he never should have tried? To understand what happened in the Pacific that November morning, you have to understand what the ocean meant to the men who worked it in the early 19th century. This wasn't the age of GPS, of satellite tracking, of Coast Guard rescue helicopters. When a whaling ship left port, Nantucket, New Bedford, Mystic, the crew understood they might not come back. Not might not in the abstract sense. Might not, as in 1 in 5 ships never returned. Vanished into the vast emptiness of the Pacific or Atlantic, swallowed by storms, crushed by ice, or simply disappearing into that terrible blank space on the maps where cartographers wrote, "Here be monsters," because they genuinely didn't know what else to write. Whaling was America's oil industry. Before petroleum, before electricity, whale oil lit the lamps of the world. It was in every streetlight, every home, every factory. Spermaceti, the waxy substance harvested from sperm whale heads, made the finest candles money could buy. Whalebone corsets shaped the silhouette of Victorian fashion. The industry was worth millions, employing tens of thousands, and it required men willing to row small wooden boats directly at 70-ton animals armed with nothing but hand-thrown harpoons and an almost pathological fearlessness. These weren't ignorant savages. These were professional hunters who understood the ocean and its inhabitants better than almost anyone alive. They knew whale behavior. They knew migration patterns. They knew which species were dangerous and which were docile. They knew the difference between an animal defending itself and something else entirely. And they knew when something was wrong. The first documented report of what would eventually be called the white whale appears in a letter dated 1810, written by a Captain Samuel Wilkins aboard the merchant ship Fortune's End. Wilkins describes encountering a sperm whale of unnatural size and coloration, approximately 800 miles west of the Chilean coast. What makes this account remarkable isn't the whale itself. Albino whales, while rare, were known to exist. What makes it remarkable is what happened next. According to Wilkins, his crew spotted the whale at dawn, moving against the current in a way that seemed to defy natural inclination. They observed it for nearly an hour. At no point did it breach for air in the normal pattern. Instead, it circled their ship at a consistent depth, visible just beneath the surface, close enough that they could see the scars covering its body. "Great gouges and furrows," Wilkins wrote, as though it had survived encounters that should have ended it a dozen times over. When the ship's lookout suggested they might harpoon it, the whale submerged. 30 seconds later, It surfaced directly beneath one of their longboats, tethered alongside the ship. It didn't strike the boat. It lifted it, carefully, deliberately. Then it released it and disappeared into the deep. The longboat was undamaged. It was, Wilkins concluded, as if the creature wished us to know it could have destroyed us, but chose mercy. I cannot say which thought disturbs me more. This wasn't an isolated incident. Between 1810 and 1820, there are at least 7 documented accounts of encounters with an unusually large, pale-colored sperm whale, exhibiting what mariners described as unnatural behavior. A Portuguese whaling crew reported being followed for 3 days by a creature they initially mistook for a ghost ship in the fog. A British merchant vessel recorded that an albino whale breached directly in front of them, forcing them off course, only to discover later they'd been heading directly into a reef that would have sunk them. In 1815, the American whaler Dauphin reported that a white whale destroyed 3 of their hunting boats in succession but ignored the men in the water, allowing them to be rescued. The ship's surgeon noted in his personal journal that the whale appeared to be teaching us a lesson, as one might discipline a disobedient child. By the time the Essex set sail in 1819, the legend of the white whale was already whispered in every port from Nantucket to Valparaiso. But legends don't sink ships, and what happened to the Essex was not a legend. The investigation into what really happened begins with a single undeniable fact. The Essex was destroyed by a sperm whale that attacked it twice, deliberately, with tactical precision. This is not disputed. The ship's captain, George Pollard Jr., testified to it. His first mate, Owen Chase, wrote a detailed account published in 1821. But it's what they didn't say, what they carefully avoided saying, that tells the real story. Chase's published narrative is measured, almost clinical. He describes the whale as approximately 85 feet long, which is impossibly large for a sperm whale. Modern specimens rarely exceed 60 feet. He describes it as having a white, wrinkled forehead, which would become the defining characteristic of Moby Dick. But in his published account, he attributes the attack to natural animal aggression, an accident, a tragic convergence of circumstances. His private letters tell a very different story. In 1843, Chase wrote to his cousin, a letter that remained in private family archives until 2003. In it, he describes what actually happened that morning. The Essex crew had been hunting whales for months with reasonable success. They'd killed multiple bulls, harvested their oil, and were preparing to head home. On November 20th, they spotted a pod of sperm whales and launched 3 hunting boats. Chase himself harpooned a medium-sized bull. As his crew worked to secure the kill, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The other whales weren't fleeing, they were circling, watching, and then the water in front of the Essex began to churn. It rose, Chase wrote, like a mountain breaching the gates of hell. I have seen many great whales in my career. This was not a whale as God made them. This was something that had survived far beyond its natural years, something that had been wounded and harpooned and hunted so many times that it had learned. It had learned what we were, what we did, and it had decided to teach us what that felt like. The first impact struck the Essex head-on, staving in the forward planking. The ship shuddered but didn't immediately sink. The whale swam approximately 600 yards away. Chase was specific about this distance, then turned. Multiple crew members watched it position itself, adjust its angle, and accelerate directly at the ship's bow. The second impact was catastrophic. The Essex began taking on water immediately. 20 men had less than 10 minutes to gather supplies before their ship, their home, their only link to civilization, disappeared beneath the Pacific. They were left with 3 small whaleboats, limited supplies, and over 1,000 miles of open ocean between them and South America. But before the ship went down, Chase witnessed something he didn't include in his published account, something he only confided to that single letter written 23 years later. As we rode away, he wrote, the creature surfaced one final time. It was watching us. Its eye, I swear before God, held an expression I have seen only in the faces of men. Not anger, not mindless rage, but satisfaction. As if it had accomplished precisely what it set out to do. As if it wanted us to survive just long enough to tell others what happens to those who hunt in these waters. The survival of the Essex crew is its own nightmare. 95 days adrift. Starvation, dehydration, storms, men dying slowly, their bodies becoming food for the survivors. This part is well documented. What's less known is that during those 95 days, the survivors reported seeing the white whale multiple times, always at a distance, always watching. Thomas Nickerson, the cabin boy, kept a detailed journal that wasn't discovered until 1960. In it, he describes seeing the pale demon on at least 4 occasions. Once, when the survivors had resorted to drawing lots to determine who would be killed for food, Nickerson claims the whale surfaced close enough that he could have touched it. It stayed with us for nearly an hour, he wrote. Then a school of fish appeared, enough that we could catch several by hand. The whale drove them to us. I am certain of it. It kept us alive, not out of mercy, but because it wanted us to remember, to warn others. It wanted us to survive the way way we'd made so many whales survive. Barely, painfully, with the memory of what we'd lost seared into our minds forever. Only 8 men survived to reach land. Of those, 3 never spoke publicly about what they'd seen. 2 became recluses. Captain Pollard sailed one more time. His next ship also sank, though from natural causes, and then spent the rest of his life as a night watchman in Nantucket, reportedly wandering the docks at night, staring at the water. Owen Chase continued whaling, but crew members reported he suffered from what we'd now call PTSD. He would wake screaming about the white whale, about its eye, about the way it watched them as they ate their dead. In 1852, Chase was declared insane and committed to an asylum, where he died in 1869. His last words, according to the attending physician, were, "It's still out there. It remembers us. God help me, I think it's still out there." Herman Melville met Owen Chase in 1841, 20 years after the Essex disaster. Melville was serving aboard the whaling ship Acushnet, and Chase's son was a crew member. The younger Chase showed Melville his father's published account of the Essex sinking, but according to Melville's own journals, he also spoke directly with Owen Chase during a chance encounter at sea. That conversation lasted 3 hours. Melville filled nearly 15 pages of notes. Those notes disappeared after his death, but references to them appear in letters to his friend and fellow writer Nathaniel Hawthorne. In one such letter, Melville writes, "Chase told me things he has never committed to paper, things that would make the reading public dismiss him as mad. But I looked into that man's eyes, Nathaniel, and I saw something that cannot be fabricated. Terror, yes, but also certainty. He spoke of the white whale as if it were not an animal but a force, an intelligence, something that has existed in the deep places far longer than men have sailed above them. He believes, and God help me, I found myself believing him, that what destroyed his ship was not an act of animal aggression, but a calculated act of war." Melville spent the next decade researching every documented encounter with aggressive sperm whales. He collected accounts from whalers across 3 continents. He studied maritime records, insurance claims, survivor testimonies, and he found the pattern. Between 1800 and 1850, there were at least 23 documented cases of sperm whales deliberately attacking ships, not accidentally colliding, not defending themselves, attacking, ramming vessels with enough force to sink them. Of those 23 incidents, 14 involved whales described as unusually large and pale-colored. 9 of those 14 were explicitly described as having the same massive scarred forehead, the same distinctive pattern of barnacles. In 4 cases, survivors from different ships years apart described the same whale. Impossible, of course. The lifespan of a sperm whale is approximately 70 years. These encounters spanned half a century, unless it wasn't one whale, or unless it was something that didn't follow the normal rules of nature. When Moby Dick was published in 1851, critics dismissed it as overwrought, too ambitious, too strange. The public largely ignored it. Melville died in obscurity in 1891, his masterpiece unrecognized. But among the whaling community, the book had a very different reputation. It was considered cursed. Multiple whaling crews refused to allow it aboard their ships. Captains who'd read it reported nightmares, not about the fictional Captain Ahab, but about the whale itself, about Melville's descriptions of its intelligence, its awareness, its terrible patience. Several retired whalers wrote to Melville directly, asking how he knew, how he could have described with such visceral accuracy details that only those who'd encountered the creature could possibly know. The way it would surface slowly, revealing itself piece by piece, as if it enjoyed the moment before the attack. The way it would circle a damaged ship, as if savoring its victory. The way survivors reported that it seemed to look at them, not the blank, instinctual gaze of an animal, but the focused, evaluating stare of something that understood exactly what it was seeing. Melville never responded to these letters, but in his personal copy of Moby Dick, discovered after his death, he'd written a single note in the margin next to the chapter describing the whale's first appearance. "They think I invented you. If only that were true." The question that keeps researchers up at night is simple. If this creature existed, if it was real, and not just a legend inflated by traumatized sailors and superstitious whalers, then what happened to it? Sperm whales were hunted to near extinction by the end of the 19th century. Modern populations are a fraction of what they once were. The industrial whaling era should have killed anything that swam in those waters, no matter how large or how clever. And yet, in 1952, a Soviet whaling fleet operating in the Pacific reported an encounter with an albino sperm whale of exceptional size that destroyed 2 of their catcher boats before disappearing into deep water. The fleet's captain, a decorated naval veteran, insisted the whale had deliberately targeted the boats that had successfully harpooned other whales earlier that day, while ignoring boats that hadn't yet made a kill. His report was classified by the Soviet government and only declassified in 1998. In 1978, a deep-sea research vessel using early sonar technology detected what they described as a biological anomaly off the coast of Chile, something moving at depths where sperm whales shouldn't be able to survive, something far larger than any known whale species. The recording was dismissed as equipment malfunction. In 2003, a digital archive project scanning historical maritime records discovered something extraordinary. Insurance claims from 15 different shipping companies between 1820 and 1880 all described attacks by a white whale of unusual size. What's remarkable isn't the descriptions, it's the locations. The attacks span from the South Pacific to the North Atlantic, from the coast of Japan to the waters off New Zealand, distances that would require traveling thousands of miles. And yet the descriptions match: the size, the scars, the tactical intelligence, the distinctive barnacle patterns that survivors sketched in their reports, detailed enough that marine biologists have confirmed they depict the same scarring on the same part of the whale's body. Either there were multiple albino whales working in coordination across the world's oceans, which is impossible, or something was traveling those distances, hunting, remembering, taking revenge on a species that had declared war on its kind. Modern marine biologists have attempted to reconstruct what such a creature might actually be. Sperm whales are already the largest toothed predators on Earth. They dive deeper than any other mammal, reaching depths of over 6,000 feet, into a world of permanent darkness and crushing pressure where they hunt giant squid. They're capable of echolocation so powerful it can stun prey from a distance. Their heads are battering rams. The spermaceti organ that fills a third of their body length isn't just for buoyancy, it's a weapon. A full-grown bull can generate impact forces equivalent to a car crash. But an 85-foot specimen, as Owen Chase described, that's beyond the known biological limits of the species. That's something else. Dr. Sarah Chen, a marine biologist at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, has proposed a theory that borders on the impossible. What if the creature whalers called Moby Dick wasn't a normal sperm whale, but a genetic anomaly? An individual that lived far beyond its natural lifespan, growing to unprecedented size, accumulating intelligence and memory beyond anything we understand about cetacean cognition. We know whales are intelligent, Dr. Chen explains. They have culture, they teach each other, they mourn their dead. But intelligence requires time to develop. A whale that lived for 100 years, maybe longer, that survived countless encounters with humans, that learned from each attack, each escape, each time it watched its pod mates die. That whale wouldn't just be intelligent, it would be something we have no framework for understanding. It would be a mind shaped entirely by trauma and survival. And it would remember, God help us, it would remember everything. The maritime records tell a story of escalation. In the early 1800s, encounters with the white whale were relatively rare and non-lethal. The creature seemed content to warn ships away, to damage boats but leave survivors. By the 1830s, the attacks became more frequent and more destructive. By the 1840s, multiple ships reported being hunted, not randomly encountered but deliberately tracked and destroyed, as if the whale was no longer content with defensive action, as if it had moved from protecting itself to declaring war. The last documented encounter in the 19th century occurred in 1882. The American merchant ship Elizabeth sighted a large, pale-colored whale off the coast of Peru. The captain, familiar with the legends, ordered his crew to give it wide berth. They altered course, putting 10 miles between themselves and the creature. According to the ship's log, the whale followed them for 3 days, never approaching close enough to be threatening, but never losing them either. On the 4th day, it disappeared. The captain wrote in his log, "It was showing us it could follow us anywhere." That distance meant nothing, that we could never truly escape, and then it let us go. I do not know which is more terrifying, that such a creature exists, or that it chose mercy. After 1882, the records go silent. No more sightings, no more attacks. For over 70 years, the white whale vanished from maritime history. Melville's novel entered the academic canon. The Essex disaster became a historical footnote. The whaling industry collapsed as petroleum replaced whale oil. The creature, if it ever truly existed, should have been forgotten. But in the deep places, in the trenches and abyssal plains where no light penetrates and the pressure can crush steel, there are still things we don't understand. Things that could survive for decades, centuries, in an environment we can barely explore. And if such a creature existed, if it learned that humans had finally stopped hunting its kind, would it have any reason to surface? Or would it simply sink back into the darkness it came from, watching and waiting to see if we'd learned our lesson? The truly disturbing part isn't that a massive, intelligent whale might have existed. The truly disturbing part is what its existence implies. Sperm whales are social animals. They live in pods, they communicate across vast distances, they share information. If one whale could learn to identify whaling ships, to understand the connection between harpoons and death, to develop tactical responses to human hunting, then then that knowledge could be transmitted. Other whales could learn. The white whale might not have been an anomaly. It might have been a teacher. There are reports, dismissed by mainstream science but persistent among maritime communities, of coordinated whale behavior that seems to defy natural explanation. In the 1970s, multiple whaling ships reported pods of sperm whales actively interfering with hunts, not fleeing, but deliberately positioning themselves between hunters and their targets. In 1980, a Japanese whaling vessel claimed their sonar detected what appeared to be dozens of whales arranged in a defensive formation, something cytologists insist is impossible. In 2015, a recreational diving group off the coast of Dominica encountered a pod of sperm whales that, according to their account, deliberately positioned themselves to protect a whale calf from the boat's approach. The dive master, a veteran with 30 years of experience, described it as military precision. They weren't panicking, they weren't fleeing, they were deploying a defensive strategy. What if Moby Dick wasn't the exception? What if it was the first? The one that learned how to fight back, that survived long enough to teach others, that transformed whale culture from fleeing to resistance. We like to think of nature as passive, as something we act upon, but the ocean is not passive. It's the birthplace of life on Earth. It covers 70% of the planet. We've explored less than 5% of it. The deepest places are more alien than the surface of Mars. And in those depths, intelligence could evolve in ways we can't begin to understand. Ways that have nothing to do with tools or language or technology. Ways that are patient, ancient, and utterly inhuman. Herman Melville understood this. His white whale wasn't just an animal. It was a symbol of everything humanity couldn't control, couldn't predict, couldn't defeat. It was the incarnation of nature's indifference to our ambitions. But symbols are abstract. They're safe. They exist on pages, in classrooms, in literary analysis. The real white whale, if it existed, wasn't a symbol. It was flesh and blood and terrible intelligence. It was something that watched men row toward it with harpoons and learned. Something that survived wounds that should have killed it and emerged stronger. Something that didn't just react to human violence, but responded with calculated brutality. Something that might still be down there, in the cold and the dark, carrying memories of an age when we declared war on the ocean, and the ocean declared war back. The revelation, when it comes, is both simpler and more disturbing than any conspiracy theory. There was no cover-up, no government suppression of evidence, no secret knowledge held by maritime authorities. The truth about Moby Dick has been hiding in plain sight for over a century, buried in dusty archives and forgotten ship logs, and the traumatized silence of men who knew no one would believe them. The truth is this: sometime in the early 19th century, a sperm whale survived an encounter with whalers that should have killed it. And in surviving, it changed, it learned, it grew, and it became something that transcended the normal boundaries of animal intelligence. It became an individual with purpose, with memory, with the capacity for something we struggle to call anything other than revenge. It hunted the hunters, it destroyed their ships, it sent survivors back to tell others what happened to those who killed whales. And when the whaling era finally ended, when humans stopped slaughtering its kind by the tens of thousands, it disappeared, not because it died, but because it no longer needed to fight. The scientists who've studied the evidence can't say this publicly without risking their careers. But privately, in conferences and academic papers carefully worded to avoid ridicule, they're asking the unthinkable. Could a whale develop consciousness sophisticated enough to hold grudges, to plan attacks, to understand that leaving survivors would spread fear more effectively than killing everyone? Could trauma and survival pressure accelerate cognitive development beyond anything we've observed in modern whales? Could a creature living in an environment as vast and alien as the deep ocean develop a form of intelligence we have no framework for recognizing? The answer, based on what we know about cetacean neurology, about the complexity of whale communication, about the documented instances of cultural transmission in whale populations, is that we don't know. We can't know, but we can't rule it out. And that uncertainty is perhaps the most frightening thing of all. Because if the white whale was real, if it truly possessed the intelligence and intent that survivors described, then what happened to the Essex wasn't a tragedy, it was a message. And every time we read Moby Dick, every time we analyze Ahab's obsession and debate the symbolism of the whale's whiteness, we're missing the point. Melville didn't write a metaphor, he wrote a warning. He tried to tell us that we'd created something in those waters, something that learned what we were, what we did, and something that decided we needed to be stopped. The whaling industry ended because it became economically unviable, because petroleum replaced whale oil, because the whales were hunted almost to extinction. But maybe in some small way, It also ended because the survivors came home and told stories of a pale shape rising from the deep, stories of ships destroyed by what seemed like deliberate malice, stories of an eye the size of a dinner plate, watching them as they clung to wreckage, as if judging whether they deserved to live. And maybe those stories, dismissed as trauma and superstition and literary embellishment, actually saved us from something worse. In the end, we're left with questions that have no comfortable answers. We've spent 200 years convincing ourselves that humanity conquered nature, that we climbed to the top of the food chain through intelligence and tool use, that we're the only species on Earth capable of abstract thought, of planning, of genuine consciousness. And then something like the white whale enters the record, something that doesn't fit the categories we've created, something that might have been an individual, singular, and unique, or might have been the first of something new, something that proved intelligence can evolve in ways that have nothing to do with hands or fire or language, something that learned, adapted, and fought back against a species that assumed dominance was its divine right. The ocean is darker than you think, colder, deeper. The average depth is over 12,000 feet. Light penetrates maybe 600 feet on a sunny day. Below that is twilight, and below that is absolute darkness that has remained unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. The pressure at those depths would crush a human instantly, but sperm whales hunt there. They navigate by sound. In a world where sight is meaningless, they dive for an hour at a time into an alien environment that we can barely explore even with our most advanced technology. And in that darkness, away from our ships and our sensors and our understanding, who knows what they remember, what they communicate, what they've learned about the creatures that invaded their world with harpoons and murder and called it industry. We tell ourselves, the age of whaling is over, that we've moved past those brutal days, that we're enlightened now, that we protect whales instead of slaughtering them. And maybe that's true. Maybe the white whale, if it still exists, has forgiven us. Maybe it swims through the deep places, ancient and solitary, satisfied that the lesson has been learned. Or maybe it's still watching, still waiting, still carrying the scars of 100 encounters with human cruelty, still remembering the ships it destroyed, the crews it sent to the bottom, the message it tried to send, still wondering if we truly learned, or if we're just waiting for the next resource to exploit, the next frontier to conquer, the next war to wage against a world that never asked for our dominion. Herman Melville ended Moby Dick with Ahab destroyed, the Pequod sunk, and Ishmael floating alone on his friend's coffin. Only one survivor to tell the tale. Maybe that was the point. Maybe Melville understood that humanity needs to be reminded over and over that we're not the only intelligence on this planet, that consciousness and purpose can evolve in forms we don't recognize, that the natural world is not a collection of resources waiting to be harvested, but a system of living, thinking beings that will eventually respond to how we treat them. The white whale didn't have language, didn't have tools, didn't have civilization, but it had memory, and memory in the end might be the most dangerous weapon of all. The truth about Moby Dick isn't hidden in classified documents or conspiracy theories. It's hidden in the vast, dark, unknowable depths of the ocean, and perhaps that's where it should stay. Because some truths aren't meant to be fully understood, some questions shouldn't be answered, and some legends are legends for a reason, not because they're false, but because the reality is too disturbing to accept. Somewhere in the Pacific, where the ocean floor drops away into trenches deeper than Everest is tall, where volcanic vents create oases of impossible life, where no human has ever been and no human may ever go, something might still swim, something old, something scarred, something that remembers when the surface was filled with ships hunting its kind. And if that something still exists, still watches, still waits, then the only reason we're safe is because it chose mercy, because it decided we'd learned, because it believed that the slaughter had finally ended. But mercy, like memory, can be revoked. And if we ever forget what we did in those waters, if we ever return to the arrogance that declared war on the ocean itself, then perhaps the white whale will rise again, not as a legend, not as a literary device, but as a force of nature reminding us that we were never the only intelligence in this world. We were just the only one arrogant enough to think we were. The Essex sank in 1820. Herman Melville died in 1891. The whaling industry collapsed in the early 20th century. Moby Dick became an American classic, and somewhere in the deep, in the cold and the dark and the crushing pressure, something that might have been a whale and might have been something more simply disappeared into the abyss. Whether it's still there, whether it ever truly existed, whether the survivors of the Essex actually saw what they claimed to see, we may never know for certain. But on quiet nights, when the ocean is calm and the moon reflects off water that stretches to the horizon, sailors still tell stories about a pale shape moving beneath the surface, about an eye that watches with terrible intelligence, about something that learned what humans were capable of and decided to teach us a lesson in return. And in those stories, passed down from crew to crew, port to port, generation to generation, there's always the same ending. The white whale disappears into the deep, and the survivors are left floating in the darkness, wondering if they were spared, or if they were simply sent home to warn the others, to remember, to never forget what swims in the deep places, patient and scarred, and eternally watchful. Because in the end, that's the truth about Moby Dick. Not that it was a whale, but that it was a reckoning. And reckonings, once summoned, never truly end. They just wait.